Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest virtual event, Funding the SQE with BPP University Law School. My name is Sophie Antian. I'm an events coordinator here at Legal Cheek, and I'll be handing over to the panel very shortly to get started. But firstly, I wanted to welcome all of you who've joined. We've had over 500 applications to attend today's event, so it's great to see so many of you here. And I'm just going to talk you through a little bit more about today's event. This is the third in a series of 8 SQE-themed virtual events that we're doing in partnership with BPP. The first in the series was all about the choice between LPC and SQE. We had the second covering qualifying work experience, and today's event is all about funding the SQE. Now, if you missed those first 2 sessions, head over to the SQE Hub on Legal Cheek. One of the team will put a link for you in the chat bar, and over there you'll find the video recordings to the first 2 sessions. Over in the SQE Hub, you'll also find all the editorial associated with these events. So the piece that ran for today's event is entitled How to Fund the SQE, which is an interview with BPP's Johnny Hurst, and I'll be handing over to him very shortly, so you can hear a bit more from him. And one of the team will also put a link to the article in the chat bar as well. Now, over the course of the next hour, the speakers are going to be covering all the different aspects of funding the SQE. They'll be discussing everything from solicitor apprenticeships, sponsorships for qualifying work experience. They'll look at privately borrowing the SQE funds if you're thinking of self-funding the SQE, and they'll be discussing much more. But before I hand over to our speakers, just to quickly go over how the event will run, we have our panel discussion here on stage 4 till 5, before at 5 o'clock we move over for some virtual networking, and I'll explain how all of that works a little bit later on. Now, everyone in the audience, do make sure your chat bar on the right-hand side is set to stage, and this is where you can pop in all of your comments and questions for the speakers over the course of the next hour. But for now, I'd like to welcome our speakers and invite them to join me up on stage. So speakers, if you'd like to come up on stage. Perfect. Hi, Johnny.
Hi there.
Great.
I think we're all there. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sophie. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you at the end of the hour. So welcome everybody to this session about funding your SQE. My name is Johnny Hurst. I am the head of student recruitment at BPP University Law School. Used to be a partner in a law firm in the city back in the day, but now I'm dedicated really to speaking to prospective students of BPP, and in particular answering a lot of questions that we are getting about the SQE, which I think it's the gift that keeps on giving. I'd like first of all to introduce you to my colleague Caroline Rayton. Caroline, I'll let you introduce yourself, I think.
Thanks, Johnny. So my name's Caroline Rayson. In case I forget it, it's written next to my name on the screen, which is excellent. I'm the head of SQE programs at BPP. So I'm also a former city solicitor, but I've been with BPP for nearly 10 years now, and I now head up the SQE programs.
Fabulous. And we're also joined for the first section of the discussion today by Laura and William. I'll just let you introduce yourselves very briefly. Let us know a little bit about you. Laura?
Okay, hello everybody. It's good to be here today. My name is Laura and I am a solicitor apprentice, currently studying through BPP, and I also work at Kennedy's, which is a law firm based in London, but they also have offices regionally and also globally.
Thanks so much, Laura. And William, I can see you posted a little bit in the chat, but just for those who haven't seen it, a bit of background on you, please.
Yeah, very happy to, Johnny. So yes, William Preston. I'm a 6-year apprentice solicitor working at Evershed Sutherland in the Birmingham office, but covering a global network of offices across the globe.
Fantastic. So one of the reasons why we want to get Laura and William involved in the beginning of this discussion is because I know that a lot of the Legal Cheek audience is a graduate audience or undergraduate audience, but there are quite a lot of people who are looking at law as a career who are currently studying for A-levels. And that is significant because there has relatively recently become a new route to qualify as a solicitor, going down the SQE route ultimately, and that's via the solicitor apprenticeship route, which is what Laura and William are both doing. We've heard where you're both at in terms of firms, but when did you start? What year are you currently in, Laura?
So I started at Kennedy's in 2014, and I did 2 years of, work experience, just working as a paralegal there. Apprenticeship in 2016, the starting month was September. So I'm now in my final year, and I've just sat the SQE 1 in November. received the good results of that, and I'll be doing SQE2 in April, and I should qualify in August 2022. So
Fantastic.
not long to go.
So the end of a 6-year journey. How about you, William? A similar story?
Very similar story, but I did join my apprenticeship straight after A levels. So I joined Evershire Sutherland in September 2016, and I've been there ever since, and enjoying the apprenticeship with BPP as well.
So really the second question we really wanted to ask you, particularly for the A-level audience out there that haven't committed maybe to go to university yet, well, what is a solicitor apprenticeship? And obviously the SQE seems to come in right at the end, just before you qualify as a solicitor, which makes sense. So what is it, briefly? Maybe William, you can start off, and then Laura, perhaps you can fill in the blanks after that.
Yeah, so the apprenticeship really blends the benefits of working and earning. So what you're learning in the classroom at BPP, you can ideally apply straight away into your workplace. So it's really structured by having 1 day a week to study and 4 days a week in the office. So for us, it's a Monday, so it's great to have that Monday to get your week off from the academic sense, but the rest of the week to be practicing it as well. So it's a really nice balance for me, because I've always enjoyed the practical element of putting it into practice.
Excellent. So it's working and learning at the same time, earning and learning, I think, as they say, at the same time. Fantastic. And is there anything you'd like to add to the question, just to explain a little bit more, Laura, in terms of what is involved in your solicitor apprenticeship?
So all I would really add is more about the studying side and what we're studying towards. Not every apprenticeship is the same, but for William and I, our apprenticeship is working towards a degree. So for 6 years, we're working towards actually getting a law degree through BPP.
Brilliant. And then
we are studying towards that.
Yep, sorry, you're occasionally cutting out, Laura, so apologies for talking over you there. So 6 years, you pick up a law degree, but not all solicitor apprenticeships do come with a law degree, but to be a solicitor apprenticeship, you have to pass the SQE at the end. It might be an obvious question, or an obvious answer to the question. A third question really is, well, Laura, why did you choose the solicitor apprenticeship route as opposed to going to university to do a law degree?
I think when I finished my A levels, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. So the idea of spending, at that time, it was £9,000 a year at university, not really sure what I wanted to do at the end of it. I thought it seemed silly to be spending that much money. And so I looked at my other options, and that was either working full time or possibly doing an apprenticeship. And the reason an apprenticeship was because you'd be getting the best of both worlds by having some kind of study and working towards a degree, but also not having to pay for it. And the added bonus that your employer actually pays you essentially to go to university.
Yeah, so we don't really need to ask our fourth question. You've just said it. There is no debt that you're going to acquire. Your employer pays for your studies, and you're learning and earning at the same time without that that burden of the debt, which is obviously an attraction. Let's look on to question 5 now. William, what does a typical week look like then for a solicitor apprentice? Obviously, it will vary from firm to firm, I imagine, but what does it look like for you?
Yeah, it does vary. I think as you progress through the apprenticeship, it gets progressively more demanding and more responsibility as well. But generally speaking, you are working very closely with your colleagues in your office or globally on transactions and projects. And as you progress through your abilities, you become a real key player. You aren't just a small cog in a big firm. You are a significant player on the project, getting involved with the client, as well as your sort of senior colleagues and partners. So you really do have a very varied week, and as you progress, a lot more responsibility as well.
Fantastic. And could you add anything, Laura? You know, what does your typical working week look like?
Yeah, very similar. So I mean, I've been working with the firm for coming up to 8 years, so I really feel like I'm doing the job of a solicitor, but haven't quite got that title yet.
And I think that's the real distinction between somebody in your position. Sorry, Laura, you cut out again. The real distinction between somebody who is a graduate who goes through a training contract or qualifying work experience and then qualifies as a solicitor has 2 years of qualifying work experience behind them. You guys have both got 6 years, so I would imagine you're going to be doing much more bigger ticket stuff much earlier on. I'm sure the others will catch up, but your career gets a kickstart, doesn't it? That's it's an interesting point. Now we're talking about funding here, but it's important when you're thinking about funding your legal studies and also your SQE. This is the path of least resistance when it comes to how you finance it. Let's just see out this part of the discussion. Just talk to you about the SQE, because Laura mentioned you passed the exams, and William, how did you do?
Yes, very, very grateful to have passed both. It was certainly a lot of stress, not knowing if I did, but very glad to get the positive results I needed.
Because they only came out last week, and we'll talk to Caroline in a moment in terms of how the cohort of apprentices at BPP did. How did you feel you were prepared for the assessments, William? We obviously we ran our SQE1 preparation course. How did you feel it prepared you?
I think it prepared for us well. We had a short time period just because of the way the timing fell with the exam dates, but despite that, it was quite an effective schedule, which meant that we were able to be prepared. And I think that the numbers, the results that we got as a university, it showed that it was effective and efficient.
Yeah, Laura, anything about the experience in terms of learning on the SQE preparation course?
Yeah, so the SQE1 assessment is a multiple choice test, which sounds a lot easier than it is. And BPP prepared us very well by having a lot of advanced materials about how to answer multiple choice questions. And we had a lot of study materials that gave us practice papers. And that was hugely beneficial, just knowing the types of questions that may or may not come up.
Yeah. I think that's so important to have that practice.
Well, yeah, it was a very difficult exam.
Yeah, sorry, there's a slight delay, I think, on the line as well. Let's bring Caroline in here now, if we could do. We've alluded to the fact that we were very pleased with our apprenticeship results from the SQE assessments. Do you want to share? What was the general pass rate, first of all, and how did BPP's first cohort of solicitor apprentices perform?
Well, going into the exams, we knew that they sounded challenging, that they're set up. Somebody in the question box was asking, they are effectively, SQE1 is 2 5-hour multiple choice question exam papers covering a range of different legal subjects. So they're quite challenging. We knew that they would be, and that's reflected in the pass rate, because the global pass rate, there were about 1,000 people who sat across the country. The global pass rate was 53%, which is quite a modest pass rate. I'm very pleased to say that we had a relatively small cohort, including these guys who went through. They did really well. We're very pleased with how they did. They were definitely, many of them were above that pass rate. So we're very pleased with the outcome.
It was a very small cohort, I think, of 17, and 14 of the students managed to pass both papers, so considerably better than the national pass rate. But again, very small cohort, and but it does show that if you do a course that is well designed, you get great results, which we're obviously very, very pleased about. So thanks for sharing that with us. So final question really for William and Laura, if we can. So what advice would you give students considering a solicitor apprenticeship that perhaps you didn't know 6 years ago? What piece of information could you share with them? Should we start with William?
Yeah, sure. I have found the last 5 or 6 years very challenging. I think going into, we were the first cohort. So I think going into it, you've really got to be prepared for what is a challenging process. But I want to caveat and say how rewarding it is, because as much as you put in, you really get out. And I really enjoyed the role I play and my position in the firm. I feel really valued. So I think going into it, recognize the challenge, but also see the many benefits you'll get out of it. So
you got to get your head down, but you get the results if you put the hard work in, as both of you have proven. Briefly, if you could do, Laura, share us anything you didn't know 6 years ago that you wish you had known that you could share with the students, please.
I think when we started, apprenticeships are quite new, and nowadays there's a lot of competition to get a solicitor apprenticeship. And So what I would say is that if you apply and you're not successful at first, then don't be disheartened by that. Then go away, get some legal work experience and apply for the next year's or a different firm. There's plenty of there nowadays.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, both of you. We're delighted that you managed to join us and spare us a few minutes from your firms. Thank your firms for us for allowing us to take you away from your work for just for a few minutes this afternoon. So, yeah, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and I'm sure we'll see you again sometime soon. And good luck with SQE too, both of you.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
For you. Thanks, both. So we're going to now bring to the stage our next two students, because what we're going to focus on now is how to finance your studies if you don't do a solicitor apprenticeship. That was one way to be able to finance your SQE and a law degree without having to go through the conventional route, so to speak. Now, we've got with us Jennifer and Shana today. Perhaps if you could just give us a little bit of detail about you, just for everyone's benefit. Jennifer and Shana are not SQE students, but they can talk about their experience of financing their courses that they've done with us, typically the LPC, because the financing the course is broadly the same. The same opportunities are available more or less, but Caroline will be able to contribute and say what is the specific stuff about the SQE that makes it slightly different. So just briefly, Jennifer, where are you in your studies at the moment? And I think you've got a training contract, so well done on that, but let us know a little bit about that in your intro.
So, hi everyone, I'm Jennifer. I studied the GDL last year at BPP and I'm currently studying the LPC. I have a training contract lined up at a medium-sized firm next year starting in September. Yeah, so that's my current position.
And how, if you could just bullet point in terms of what was your approach to financing your studies, because your training contract isn't sponsored, is it? But we can talk about how you acquired it a bit later on, but just in bullet points, where was the money coming from for your studies?
So I've been really lucky. So in my first year at BPP, I got a scholarship for £2,000 as a careers commitment scholarship. And I also I have my own business and I work as and when I want to, very flexibly, so I can fit it around studying, which was very helpful for getting a bit of extra money. And then this year I have a full fees scholarship from BPP, so all of my tuition fees have been paid for, and I'm still working in my own company to finance extra bits and bobs.
Excellent, thank you so much. Shana, tell us a bit about yourself and how you financed the course.
Hi everyone, nice to be here and speak to you virtually. My name's Shana and I've just completed the LPC with the LLM Masters Top-Up at BPP. Prior to that, so in 2020, I did my GDL at BPP also.
Fantastic. And in terms of finance, I know you've had quite a long list of different pots where you've managed to secure funding from over the last year or two. Do you just want to bullet point what they were?
Yeah, sure. So I would say most of my funding has come directly from BPP, so applying for various scholarships. So just like my colleague Jennifer here, I applied for the Career Commitment Scholarship, both for the GDL and the LPC course. In addition to that, I also applied externally to various foundations out there. So one that comes to mind is the Aspiring Solicitors Foundation, who have scholarships exclusively for students studying at BPP. So that's something I would highly recommend. And because I applied for the LPC with the LLM, it's eligible for student finance funding too. And that's also what I applied for.
And we'll focus on a lot of those different sources of funding in a moment. Now let's bring Caroline in before we go through the different sections of funding. When you're funding the SQE, it's not quite like funding the LPC, is it? Because you're not just funding whatever learning you need to fund. There's other things you need to bring in. One very large chunk of money that you need to finance. What's that then, Caroline?
Okay, I'm seeing in the chat there's quite a lot of questions just about what the SQE is and how it fits together. I'll just talk about that really briefly, if that's okay, Johnny.
Yeah, sure. I think we just head that off. Yeah,
deal with a few questions there. the SQE is these two big exams I was talking about, and basically the material that you're examined on in those exams is a mixture of law, black letter law subjects, so the sort of thing you would either study on a law degree or on something like a GDL, added to practice subjects, which are the sort of things you would historically have studied in the first part of your LPC. And they're all wrapped up together and they are assessed in these SQE1 exams. And then once you've done those, which are all about the knowledge, you then do a set of SQE2 exams, which assess a mixture of certain legal skills like legal writing, legal drafting, advocacy, but also woven into that is your understanding of that same knowledge material that you use for SQE1. So basically in the SQE process, you set yourself up with a really, really solid knowledge of all of that law, do the SQE1 exams, and then take that knowledge in to then take the skills exams. And the apprentices we were talking about earlier, or talking to earlier, they had just done the SQE1 exams, those massive knowledge exams, and they're just getting themselves prepared, and they're going to sit those skills exams in April. So that is, sorry, Johnny, that's not what you asked me, but I thought it'd be helpful just to mention that.
Sure. And just to say on the chat, everybody, we will try and answer all your questions that we can, but we want to get you through the key headings that we've referred to earlier, and sort of Sophie mentioned at the top of the different ways you can fund. We will attempt to answer as many questions as possible, but do stick around for the networking at the end. So at 5 o'clock, if we go into the networking rooms, any question that isn't answered, please do just pop in and ask your question then, and either Caroline or I, or if it's one more for Shana or Jennifer, please do pop it to them. So Caroline, just go back to the question. So when it comes to funding, you've got to know, well, what are we funding for the SQE? Yes. And it's not just funding a preparation course, is it, this time?
No, that's right. So if we start with the fixed cost that you have to pay if you want to do the SQE result route, that is paying for those exams. Because unlike for the LPC, where the exams are just wrapped up in your course fee, for the SQE, you pay Kaplan, which is the organisation that's organising these on behalf of the Solicitors Regulation Authority. You pay your fees to them. And just in very broad terms, SQE1 is about £1,500 and SQE2 is about £2,500. So the total exam fees is basically £4,000. So that is something that you have to pay if you want to qualify on the SQE route. And then after that, you need to think, well, okay, I'm going to do these really high stakes exams, which are going to cost me a lot of money. How do I prepare myself for that? What's the best way for me to be as prepared as I can be? And then, of course, you will pay your provider for the course or courses that you do to get yourself ready for those exams.
And I think it's fair to say, and we're not going to go into this now because that's really the subject for another day, but there are so many different providers out there offering so many different bodies of learning to prepare you, some very quick, some quite extended, some much more in depth than the syllabus than the SQE itself, because like at BPP in particular, we believe we need to prepare you not just to pass an exam, but to prepare you for practice. So there's a lot out there, and please do your research very, very carefully, because I think people will make mistakes if they just go for the quickest and cheapest thing that's available. But let's talk about funding, because that's what we're here to do tonight. And the first section we're going to deal with is, well, one of the best ways to get funding, if you're not doing it as a solicitor apprenticeship, is to get sponsored by a law firm. And Caroline, you've taught law firms, students who are sponsored at law firms. So what is the process by which you get a sponsored training contract? There'll be some people who know here tonight, but plenty who don't.
So that would be a question of applying for a job at that firm. So historically, that would have been a training contract in the old world. In the new world, it's called qualifying work experience, but in both cases, it's 2 years. And if you're sponsored, it would normally be 2 years in the same firm. And by taking you on as a sponsored student, you can expect that they would pay your fees, your course fees, and your exams. And they would probably also pay you some sort of living allowance as well. So that's how I trained quite a long time ago. But that's how I trained, and it meant that it was, relatively financially relaxed as a result.
But unfortunately, not everybody is lucky enough to get a sponsored training contract. We all have to go through a recruitment process to get one. Now, Jennifer, you have got a training contract, but you've gone through the recruitment process. So tell us a little bit about that, because it'll be very similar to some of the recruitment process for those who are being sponsored. So what did you go through to get your training contract?
I made 3 applications to law firms, and it was a series of questions that I had to answer in detail. Each law firm that I applied for had different questions and a different process. So one that I applied for was I had to create a video, and then I had to go through an first interview, which was just about me, then a second interview, which was more technical. I actually had to create a presentation about the SQE for that law interview, because it's such a relevant topic to law firms at the moment. They're all interested in figuring out how it's going to work. And so my experience was all just written applications and interviews and creating videos. I didn't have to do any experiences where you go into the centre and interact with other people, but those are things that do exist. And it was just, they take a very long time, so you need to dedicate a lot of time to writing them, rewriting them, writing them again, and just correcting them. And I worked really very, very closely with the team at BPP and their careers service to help me make sure that the applications that I was writing were presenting me in the best light possible, so that I would get through to the next stage and then the next stage. And in the end, I got all 3 training contracts and had to choose between them.
Fantastic. Well, that's extraordinary. And
That's amazing.
in terms of, maybe you can bring Shana here as well to contribute, but either of you could answer this question. When it comes to, this is part of the sponsorship point here, when it comes to making applications, what's your advice? To make as many as possible and hope one of them sticks, or was there a different approach that you make? Any sort of advice that you would give, or what have you been advised by our career service in that regard?
I'll say. So I applied for 3 because I wanted to dedicate the time that they need, so much time that I wanted to make sure that I knew the firm inside out, and that I was actually applying to the right firm for me and not just making a lot of blanket applications. And I chose my firms very deliberately based on what I wanted, and that I genuinely thought I would fit in there, and did my research.
Yeah.
And it just takes so long that if I don't see the point of sending out 30 applications when none of them are going to be successful because you've not researched them and you're not going to fit in there. Far better to spend the time that you would have spent on 30 on 3 and get one of those.
And that's exactly the point that that people need to know out there. You just won't be successful if you copy and paste your answers from one application to another. It just doesn't work. Shana, where are you in the Shana? Where are you in the recruitment process at the moment?
So I'm currently in the process of applying for training contracts at the moment. So I'll be taking on Jennifer's advice, and I think I can, based on what I've experienced, really attest to the fact that it is a matter of quality over quantity. You cannot dish out 30 to 40 different training contract applications and copy and paste, because what you will find is you might copy in the wrong firm name. And of course, that is a reason why most applications get rejected, having spoken to some graduate recruitment officers at firms. So yeah, I'm going through the process, looking for firms and having a lot of fun with Watson Glaser test, as I'm sure that's something that everybody enjoys. It's so much fun.
What is a Watson Glaser test? Because I'm sure some people on the call won't know.
So Watson Glaser test is an online psychometric test. I'm not sure if Jennifer's had any experience with the test. It's a sort of love or hate test. I mean, I've never met anybody that likes the test. It's basically you having to read text, and the firm is assessing your verbal reasoning skills, critical reasoning.
Brilliant. And so we've talked about interviews being part of the process. We've talked about Watson Glaser type of psychometric tests being part of the recruitment process. And Caroline, assessment centres often form quite a central feature, don't they? What sort of things might students be expected to do in an assessment centre for securing qualifying work experience at a firm where they get sponsored? What sort of things would they expect? Oh, you're muted, I'm afraid.
Nobody's ever done that before, have they? Jennifer's alluded to this already, that quite often the selection process will involve much more interactive work. And I think probably in COVID times that's been less the case, of course. But they do like to see you in a room interacting with other people. You might be, for example, negotiating a contract or drafting something together, problem solving together. Because remember that the law profession, it's not just an academic profession, it's a dynamic people profession. There's a huge amount of problem solving in it. They want to see what you're like, put under pressure, with difficult things to sort out, how you might manage your colleagues, how you can work as part of a team. So it's part of showing you as a rounded individual, really. They're quite fun, actually, if you don't stress about them too much.
Yeah, when I watch The Apprentice, as I sometimes do, I sometimes think this isn't a million miles away from some of those assessment centre type of group experiences where you try and see how people work together as a team in a commercial environment, in a commercial scenario. So yeah, you could do a lot worse by doing a little bit of research. It shouldn't be exclusively on watching Alan Sugar, because that's probably going to give you nightmares, but certainly
please don't.
But certainly when learning from the mistakes that people make there will actually be quite informative for some of the commercial decisions you have to make in an assessment centre environment. We could talk all day about how to get sponsorship for qualifying work experience. Maybe just to round this part off, Caroline, just to clarify, qualifying work experience is the equivalent of the training contract under the new regime. From what you know, are most firms going to be, who are sponsoring, are they going to run qualifying work experience in a similar way to training contracts? Are they going to be, are some taking a different take on it? What's the feel out there at the moment from firms?
I think the sort of firms that sponsor, their qualifying work experience will look, I think, quite like training contracts used to look. They'll just rebadge them. A great advantage of qualifying work experience, just very briefly, is that you don't have to do it in a 2-year block with one firm. So if you don't manage to secure a job in this way, and we'll talk about this a bit later, I'm sure, you can put together other experience that you've got. And some people in the box have talked about the fact that they've already got some legal experience. If you can get that signed off as qualifying work experience, and the SRA's website will really help you understand whether it will be possible or not, that will get you up and running, give you a bit of a flying start into that world. Absolutely.
And we covered quite a lot of that in our previous session with Legal Cheek last month, and so do check out the recording on that and the article. So let's move on to the second subject, which is we'll deal with briefly, because everyone knows you can privately borrow, so privately borrowing money from a reputable lender. We do know that there are lenders out there. There are, however, quite a lot of lenders that people won't be aware of, but are specialists who lend to students. And I'm just going to name check one of them because they're very, very popular, not just with BPP students, but students at various other providers, and they're known as Future Finance. Other providers and lenders are available, but they are specialists, and there are a number of specialists out there that do lend to law students, and the credit scoring for someone in your position is a lot easier because they know what your career pathway is. Whereas if you walk into one of the high street banks, yes, you'll probably get a loan in the end, but I think it's a lot more long-winded, and the rates will be slightly different. And you can borrow quite a lot of money on effectively a career development loan, which it would be for these less well-known lenders. So what we're going to do is we will provide you with, I think, a link in the chat to one or two of these going forward. Let us go on to what is a more significant way to borrow money, and that is something that we've heard about from one of our speakers already, and that's doing the master's version of a SQE course. Now, I think, Shana, you mentioned you're doing the master's version of the LPC, but it's exactly the same principle. Do you want to explain how you get the funding and how much the funding is from best of your memory? And I can fill in the blanks if you like.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So it's very much similar to the process for applying for student finance for your undergraduate degree here in the UK. You essentially complete the form online through the student finance website, complete details of sort of your income, your financial status, where you're intending to study, the course, select the appropriate course because there's various LLMs out there, and fill in the details of the institution. And if you get the funding, the maximum, I believe, is just above £10,000. So it's quite a lot, actually, quite significant in terms of funding that course.
Yeah, it's 11,570 in the current academic year, and will go up for the next academic year. Absolutely, and that really does make a difference. And we have found a significant number of students, like Shana, have done the master's version of the LPC. What's it looking like for our SQE courses then, Caroline? Do we at BPP, and there are some other providers that, but not all providers will do a master's version of their SQE courses. What does our master's version look like that obviously attracts this funding?
Well, there are two main ones it's worth talking about here. The first is if you are not a law graduate and you need to do some sort of conversion course. We call it the Law Foundations course now. So there is a master's which combines the Law Foundations course with our preparation course for SQE1 exams. So that all gets bundled together, and that's called the SQE training for non-law graduates. And that attracts master's funding if you're a UK student and you're eligible. And then the second master's I would want to tell you about is the one for law graduates. So SQE training for law graduates, surprisingly enough. And that is made up of SQE preparation for SQE1, an element which we call Essentials for Practice, which is a bit like tips used to be on the LPC. You undertake a project, a master's level project. You wrap all of those three elements together, and that is a master's degree, and that also will qualify for SLC funding.
And it's really important to emphasize, isn't it, Caroline, that not all providers and not all courses will attract master's funding. Why is that?
Well, it's partly because of the nature of the institution, whether they have degree awarding powers of that kind, but it's also to do with what their master's is made up of, because it has to be 180 credits at level 7 to qualify. So that might also be a reason why.
So the reality is, if you do a very quick, very cheap course, it isn't going to attract master's funding because it simply won't have enough credits, however good it is, and you would have to finance that course in another way. And we've got options both ends of the scale, but we would always recommend the master's version, I think, because of that extra body of learning, that essentials for practice that's built in within it, that most of the top law firms are saying they want their students to have something similar to what they used to have under the LPC with elective training, and the SQE syllabus doesn't include any specialist knowledge at all, and therefore there's a gap there between just passing the SQE and what the expectations are of quite a lot of law firms. So you might be selling yourself short by taking a very quick course, a very cheap course that possibly it's quicker to fund, but you might in the long run be prepared to wait a little longer, maybe get some legal work experience, that finance is doing a more in-depth course that makes you more employable down the line and gives you more options. So definitely do consider that, everyone. So that's master's funding. Let's move on because we've got quite a lot more to get through. So scholarships now. And we heard from Shana and Jennifer earlier that they both are scholars award scholarships from BPP. So, I mean, it's fair to say that all institutions offer some sort of bursary or scholarships to attract excellent candidates, and BPP is no exception. Perhaps, Jennifer, you could just explain a little bit about, you said you were awarded the Career Commitment Scholarship. How was the process for that?
So all I had to do was answer 4 questions, which were quite similar to questions that I answered for law applications to law firms. They were about 300 words per question. I heard back within 3 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks, about whether I'd got the Career Commitment Scholarship. It was a really simple process, very, very easy. It was just 4 questions. There was no interview involved or anything.
And then what we do, certainly at the moment, we are in the process of reviewing our scholarships, but our process has always been have a process for a large number of students to get a decent sum of money by way of a fee discount of £2,000. And then we do shortlist people for a full fee scholarship. And you've been through that process, I think, as well, haven't you, Jennifer? So do you want to explain what that was?
So after getting the Career Commitment Scholarship, I heard that I'd been shortlisted for the full fees scholarship. And then I found out that I'd made the shortlist and that I had to do a project. I think it was 1,500 words on a topic that I was given 2 weeks to prepare it. sent it off, and within about 5 days, I heard that I'd got the full fee scholarship from you, Johnny.
Yeah. Yes, I know. It's the day in the year, or the days in the year when I make those calls. It gives me the most pleasure to having seen somebody who's filled out obviously an excellent application to begin with, done a great project, and then I can give you the great news, as well as a number of your peers, that we would be awarding you guys a full scholarship. And the point is, full scholarships are offered at a lot of institutions, and they will have different processes. For me, obviously, today with BPP students, we could just explain what our process is, but do research the scholarships that are available. It is really important that you do, because that can be a significant contribution. And you need to look at funding, not just from one source, but think about how you pull funding from multiple sources, including scholarships. And I think, Shana, you said you got a career commitment scholarship as well. So well done for doing that. If we could move on, though, to just talk about the next section, which is other types of scholarships that are available. And Shana, you did mention that in your introduction, which was quite helpful. So there are a number of scholarships, and I've just listed a couple here because for shortness of time we can't talk about them all. Can we talk about the AS Foundation, because you received a scholarship through them? First of all, what is the AS Foundation?
Yeah, so AS Foundation is very much run quite similar to aspiring solicitors. Their sort of ethos is to remove any of the financial barriers out there for people like myself, who is an aspiring solicitor. So they offer various scholarships. The one I applied for was specific to BPP, but also they go beyond scholarships and help people beyond that. So they offer laptops for people who are studying online and cannot obviously access the virtual environment with a laptop, grants for printers for working from home, even workwear. So if you're attending an interview, you could apply for some workwear for an interview coming up, and also online subscriptions. So quite a wide array of things on offer.
Excellent. And we at BPP are delighted to partner with the AS Foundation, like we partner with a number of external partners in helping Shana and a huge number of other students to finance their studies. And we also contribute towards the Law Society's Diversity Access Scheme. And we'll be giving you links to both these. The way that the Law Society Diversity Access Scheme works, as you can imagine, it's dedicated to increasing diversity and widening participation in the profession, which I'm very dedicated to. I'm the first person in my family to go to uni, so social mobility is really, really important to me, and therefore, because I'm in charge of scholarships at BPP, I've made our scholarships develop in a way that they are focused almost entirely on widening participation, and yeah, that's the way it should be, so that it gives people an opportunity to study that otherwise wouldn't do, or makes it just slightly easier if it means giving people access to a laptop or a printer and things like that. That's exactly the sort of thing that we like to support. So we have partnerships with a number of organizations, and we'll be updating our web pages for more details on the partnerships we have that can give you further access to your funding options by way of scholarships. So scholarships from multiple sources, not just from the institutions themselves. If I could now bring in Caroline, I don't know if you know about this, but I think you probably do. The SQE fees funding from Kaplan is something that's been talked about, because I mean there's a very big need, isn't there, from a social mobility basis and widening partition basis for the fees to be paid, because or fees to be covered by somewhere else, because that isn't something that will be covered out of the out of a master's sponsorship funding, because that has to go towards the fees essentially. So this is an extra sum of money. What is the latest, or are they SQE and the Kaplan still thinking about providing this sort of fund for students? What are you aware of yourself?
As far as I know, it's still a bit of a work in progress. So I think legal market in general has flagged to the RA that there are people who've just not been able to fund this if you pursue this route. So I think we will, in course, be seeing this. They're talking about funding some sort of fund for the purpose. But it's not we've seen progress on yet.
Yeah, so just to remind everybody, sorry, you were cutting in and out a bit there, Caroline. That's the £4,000 assessment fees we mentioned earlier. So that's a large chunk of money that you have to pay to be able to sit both SQE1 and SQE2 combined. It's roughly 1,500, as Caroline said, for SQE1, 2,500 roughly for SQE2. It's a large chunk of money to find on top of whatever preparation course you need. And as we said earlier, what you pay for, you probably get in terms of value. Generally, short course, I would say, probably reduces your options to pass, because it won't cover as much. So do a much more in-depth course, and it gives you more employment prospects further down the line. But it all costs money, so look for this funding if you're eligible. And I think from a social mobility basis, Kaplan are doing the right thing in creating this fund, but we don't know how big it is or what the process is. But look out for that, particularly if you are from a social demographic group that you think that you may stand a chance of applying for that funding. And I think the final subject I wanted to talk about with everyone was just the idea of using paid work to save money. And I know it's really obvious, but there's a whole number of different ways that one can finance the course. And yeah, you can work before the SQE. A lot of students do that. I mean, Caroline, what would be the value in a student choosing maybe to just take a 6-12 month sabbatical before they even think about the SQE from a developmental point of view as well as a financial point of view?
Well, particularly if you can get yourself employment in some sort of legal context, it could actually really help you with your studies down the line. So if you can, for example, get paralegal work at that stage, reasonably paid, but also gets you inside a law firm, and you can check that you like it, but you can also see which areas interest you, and it will inform your studies when you actually come to do SQE training.
Absolutely.
So I think also an associate can be a distraction to be part-time and be working part-time as well. There is an argument for being a bit more pure about it and say, right, first I work and then I study. That's not the model that we saw for apprentices earlier, and they were advocates of the alternative, but some might find that works for them.
Sorry, you are cutting in and out a little bit. I'll just sort of repeat a little bit of that. But the combination of earning and learning, like the apprentices described, is one option. But you could decide to chunk your learning or keep your learning and your working completely separate. Some people do that. But over the years, we've taught many people on the LPC part-time who have combined full-time work with it. And that's certainly the expectation of the large number of SQE1 applicants who are going to study part-time with us going forwards, that they will be working full-time in paralegal roles that, of course, might be counting towards qualifying work experience as well. So that's an extra sort of string to the bow. So in terms of our two students here, so Jennifer and Shana, what sort of work have you been doing? I think, Jennifer, you mentioned you run your own business. Have you managed to, without asking you, I don't want you to give any figures or show us any accounts or anything, but clearly not. But in terms of funding, was that something that was realistically making quite a large chunk into the financial planning you had?
I worked for a year before I started the PGDL and saved for that way. The company that I own, it's enough to kind of tick over, but it's certainly not. It wouldn't cover fees and everything else. So it's nice to have that little bit extra, but it's not hugely substantial.
But it shows the value of having a plan that you had was, look, I need to work for a chunk of time before I start my legal training. And the same applies to anyone who maybe thinks, well, I possibly might get a scholarship, could get the master's funding, but there's still a bit of a shortfall. Yeah, in a career that's that might be 30, 35 years, what's another 6 months if you get to do the right course for you and your career development? I think, doing the course as quickly as you can do as soon as you finish university isn't necessarily everyone's best option. Some people's, but not everyone's. Shana, tell us a little bit about your working journey along helping finance your fees.
Yeah, so I've had like two main roles really. So going back to when I studied the GDL at BPP, so Jan 2020, pre-pandemic, which seems like a lifetime ago, to be honest.
Of course it does.
I was commuting regularly. So the work I was doing on the side, I was a law tutor, and that helped to cover my commute, my daily commute going in and out, because everything's quite expensive in London. Also lunch, which was quite cool. and a cheeky coffee every here and then to meet up with tutors and whatnot. It was great. And for the RPC, because of course of the pandemic lockdown, everybody was forced to stay at home against their own will kind of thing. I then was able to tutor online, which meant I could then fund materials, so textbooks and whatnot.
Excellent, excellent. And I think one thing, I suppose, Caroline, we need to sort of give students a little bit of advice about when it comes to studying for the SQE and combining it with work. There is a bit of a health warning that we do need to give about not biting off more than you can chew. So if you do a full-time course, what could a student realistically expect to do alongside that by way of paid work, if anything? What do we recommend, first of all?
I would have thought if somebody is studying full-time, that is a full-time commitment. So if you're going to be working alongside it, it only really be minimum, maybe a couple of evenings or maybe a Saturday, but I would say you could do more than that. Which sounds like not very much, but as you're saying there, it could make the difference between the odd nice lunch and not. But really, you're taking on quite a lot by studying for something like the SQE. So you do need to give yourself a chance to do well.
Yeah, and just to give people an idea, what sort of commitment is it as a student? I know it's very similar to the LPC, and I'll just get hopefully Jennifer and Shana to confirm how much they're doing and whether they could, how much paid work they could do alongside it. But what are your thoughts then, Caroline?
Well, you're looking for the SQE preparation course, for example, that we have that gets you ready for SQE. You're looking at basically 40 weeks, which means that isn't much. If you want to also relax and have quality of life, there's not tons of space around the edges of that.
Yeah, that's true. And so just to see if we can corroborate what Caroline's saying in terms of not much extra time. How much extra time, Shana, do you have in the week if you wanted to work alongside the LPC and your studies? Would you say that you actually have?
I think short answer is not a lot. I think you can definitely not do multiple jobs and study any course at full-time. Part-time possibly. So mainly I was spending weekends essentially working, so it meant that prep time and preparation all fell to throughout the week and evenings.
So really having very little extra time if you're going to be working 1 or 2 days of the weekend, that really does put a lot of pressure on you, and you will either end up being very, very tired or cut corners, and we wouldn't want either if you got overcommitted in that sense. What's your thoughts on sort of combining paid work, Jennifer, with full-time study?
I wouldn't like to do it. I like having free time. I do work, but because it's entirely flexible, when there are weeks where there's less work, I can balance it out with more paid work. And if I've got a really heavy week, then I don't do anything. And I do find that it does vary somewhat the amount of work that you have. So if you can get something that's very flexible, then potentially you've got a chance. But I wouldn't like to do more than a few hours a week by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure. I think what we're going to do is probably take a few questions in a moment. Maybe Caroline, you could just have a quick look to see whether there are any questions in particular that are useful to share with the group in a moment. I'll just get some sort of closing reflections from our students in terms of what do you guys now know about financing your legal studies that is a golden nugget that you could have told your former self 3, 4, 5 years ago when you were sort of planning to do your professional qualifications. What golden nugget of advice about planning your finances could you share? Maybe Jennifer, perhaps we could start with you.
So golden nugget would be to use the resources that you have and plan everything very carefully. It differs for everybody, but yeah, I think that you need to be organized, know what you're getting into, and then stick to the plan.
Yeah, and really run that, see what that budget is, cost it. And I would certainly recommend, you're looking at funding your career here, and this is a once and only time that you will do it. Do you want to do it on the cheap, or do you want to give yourself the best possible options to qualify into the type of firms you want to go into? And the answers you give to those questions can be extremely different, and can be extremely different in how much you budget for. Ask yourself, where do you want to be in 4 or 5 years' time? And then think about, well, what are the expectations of those law firms for me to get there? And then think about, well, what is the training that I need? And therefore, how much do I need to fund that particular training? That's the sort of thought process I think you need to go on, and having a plan, I think, is basically what Jennifer is saying. That's what that all is. But think about the destination, and then think about the points along the journey to get there, and that looks at what course you need and then how you're going to fund it. Almost go backwards, I suppose. Shannon, any sort of golden piece of nugget that we can give the students before we go to Caroline with some questions?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say really muster up that confidence and make those scholarship applications, particularly if you are applying to BPP or the ASF like I did. Yeah, you truly have like a lot to give. So yeah, get that confidence in and get those applications out, and hopefully you could meet with success and come join BPP, an amazing institution.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I didn't pay you to say that, but thank you very much.
No, he didn't.
But I think that the point is, spending the time on the scholarship applications is a really, really good point, because sometimes I see an application and I think, well, this person hasn't spent any time at all. Why do you think that we're going to award you a scholarship on the basis of that? Other people will write applications that are that they spend time on, but when they read it and they think about it objectively, it probably reads like a lot of other people's. It's quite generic. I think the key, and probably the reasons why Jennifer and Shana were successful applicants, is that they gave some information about themselves that was unique, about their own journey. And actually, I could see who the lawyer was, and I could see the ambition, I could see what was motivating them, and the challenges perhaps they got to get here, or whatever it was. And for that's going to tip the balance in favor of me looking at your application more seriously, because you stand out. So try not to make your application generic, but spending time, as Shina says, on that application is really, really important. Well, thank you both of you. Perhaps we'll just stay on just in case there's a question for either of them that Caroline has managed to pick out. We haven't got time for all the questions, but any one or two that jump out, Caroline, that you think we ought to be helping them, the audience out with?
Okay, a lot of the questions are not finance related, so I'm going to leave those, because you and I maybe handle those in later if people still got questions. Some are about LPC SQE, and there's a talk on that, a legal cheek talk on that, and a bit about the mechanics of it all works, SQE regime. On scholarship, somebody's asked where do you have to have accepted your before you can apply, or can you apply for a scholarship when you apply?
Certainly at BPP, if you've made an application, then once you need to have made an application before you can be considered for a scholarship. It will vary at different institutions. We used to have a policy where you had to accept your place, but we don't have that anymore. As long as you've made an application, then we will then submit your application to us and we will consider it.
Okay, and for the SQE courses for scholarships, will they be available for SQE 1 preparation, or will they all be available for SQE 2 coaching?
For the scholarships, you're saying?
Mm.
Well, we're in the process of writing our new policy on scholarships. What our scholarship policy will be, that it will you'll have to commit to a certain package of learning. So if you've just done, if you're just paying for a very short course, then that won't attract scholarship funding. Whereas if you commit to one of the packages, then that's going to give you a greater chance of getting a scholarship that way. So generally speaking, you need to be doing either a diploma or a master's with us, rather than just picking out one small bit of learning.
Okay, fine. And then the other one I'll just pick is overseas students. Are they able to apply for scholarship? And if
Yes, absolutely.
If they're stuck with an affiliated organisation, BPP, can they apply for scholarship?
Well, all students who study at BPP, whether international or international students or domestic students, can qualify for a scholarship. Just to emphasise, scholarships are scholarships in relation to fee discounts. That's the way that they work. So you don't get the cash in your hand, you get that off your fees ultimately in the end. So one last question maybe, or do you think we've done most of the?
I think we've the finance ones. I say there's a lot of others which I think we'll end up talking about.
I think we're ticking around to 5 o'clock. So let me thank so much Jennifer and Shana as well. It's been fantastic just to have your contributions as law students who've been funding your assessments and your courses up to now. In the same way that SQE students will be doing so. Please do, everyone, stick around with us for the networking that will be coming up in a few seconds' time once Sophie pops back into the room. And thank you again, Caroline, also for sharing the platform with me today. As we said at the beginning, Caroline is the font of all knowledge for the SQE when it comes to studying at BPP. And I'm sure that if you've got any questions for her, she and I would be delighted to answer them. But I'm sure Caroline will do most of the answering. So seamlessly, let me hand over to Sophie. Thank you once again for having such a great audience with so many fantastic questions that have been coming in that we'll obviously start to get to answer once we go into the breakout rooms. But thank you so much for partnering with us. We do love doing the stuff with Legal Cheek, and the fact that we've got this SQE hub that we're partnering with you that really does fill that gap for students in the knowledge that there is about the SQE, which we can clearly see from the chat. So thank you once again, Sophie.
No, fantastic. Thanks, Johnny. And thanks again to all of you speakers for joining us this afternoon. I can see, as Johnny said, we've had so many questions coming through the chat bar. So it's clear everyone in the audience has really got a lot out of it. But like Johnny said, unfortunately, that's all we have time for in terms of the panel discussion. But everyone in the audience, don't go anywhere yet, because we now have an hour of virtual networking for you. So we're only halfway through today's event. But speakers, just a final thank you. If you could head over to your booths and take your places over there and get set up. But everyone in the audience, stay where you are, and I'm going to explain how the virtual networking will all work. So speakers, if you go and take your places. Perfect. Okay. So just a reminder before we head over to the virtual networking that a recording of this session will be made available 1 month from today over on the SQE hub that I mentioned earlier that's on Legal Cheek. So someone from the Legal Cheek team will pop the link to the SQE hub in the chat bar. So keep that link handy and you can head over there 1 month from today and watch the session again if you want to refer back to anything that was said today. But now it's on to some virtual networking. So in just a second, you're all going to head over to Expo in the left-hand sidebar. And when you get there, you'll see we have 2 booths for you. So we have Johnny and Caroline in one booth and Jennifer and Shana in another. So here you have the opportunity to ask your questions directly to the speakers. So any questions you popped in the chat bar that we didn't have time to get to, take them over to the booths and ask the speakers directly there. Now, when you go into a booth, make sure you press that blue button, top right-hand corner, that says Share Audio and Video. So you can go on the video chat and ask your questions to the speakers face-to-face. But now all that's left to do is click on Expo in the left-hand sidebar, head into a booth and get networking. And I'll see you all over there. Bye, everyone.